I'm Maya Chin, 28 years old, and I thought I knew everything about family loyalty until the day my own blood decided I wasn't worth a seat at my grandmother's while reading. They called me ungrateful and selfish for questioning their sudden concern for Grandma Rose during her final months. What they didn't expect was for the lawyer to have a very different story, one that would expose decades of lies, manipulation, and greed that ran so deep it would destroy our family forever. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama that literally changed everything I thought I knew about my own relatives, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that involves shocking family betrayals, long-buried secrets, and the most satisfying karma moment you've ever heard, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge story is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the twist that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. Growing up in the Chin family meant understanding your place in an invisible hierarchy that seemed carved in stone. My older brother Marcus was the golden child, the Harvard MBA, the successful investment banker, the one who never questioned family decisions and always said the right thing at family gatherings. Then there was my younger sister Lily, the sweet, agreeable daughter who followed every family tradition without complaint and never made waves. And then there was me, Maya, the family disappointment who had the audacity to become a social worker instead of a doctor, who moved across the country for my career, and who apparently committed the unforgivable sin of having opinions about how our family operated. The dynamics in our family were toxic, but I didn't fully understand just how deep the poison ran until Grandma Rose started showing signs of dementia 3 years ago. Rose Chin had been the matriarch of our family for as long as I could remember, a fierce, independent woman who had built a small real estate empire from nothing after immigrating from Taiwan in the 1960s. She was sharp as a tack, funny as hell, and absolutely no nonsense when it came to people trying to take advantage of her. I had always been closest to Grandma Rose. While Marcus was busy climbing the corporate ladder and Lily was focused on finding the perfect husband, I was the one who would sit with Grandma for hours, listening to her stories about the old country, her struggles as a young immigrant, and her dreams for our family's future. She was the one person in my family who never made me feel like my choices were wrong or my career was somehow beneath us. When the dementia started affecting her memory and judgment, I noticed changes in how my family interacted with her. Suddenly, Marcus was visiting every weekend instead of his usual once-a-month appearances. Lily started calling her daily, something she had never done before. My mother, Patricia, who had always had a complicated relationship with her mother-in-law, became suspiciously attentive and helpful. At first, I thought this was beautiful. Maybe my family was finally stepping up to care for the woman who had given us everything. But then I started noticing other things. Grandma Rose seemed confused about financial decisions she was supposedly making. She mentioned signing papers she couldn't quite remember. When I asked about her estate planning during one of my visits, she looked genuinely puzzled and said she thought everything was already taken care of years ago. The red flags became impossible to ignore when I suggested we hire a professional caregiver to help Grandma Rose maintain her independence safely. My mother immediately shut down the idea, insisting that family should take care of family. Marcus backed her up, saying they had everything under control. When I persisted, suggesting we at least get a second opinion on her medical care, my mother accused me of not trusting the family and trying to interfere in matters that didn't concern me. "You live in California, Maya," my mother said during one particularly heated phone call. "You visit maybe 3 times a year. You don't get to swoop in and start making decisions about Grandma's care when the rest of us are here handling everything." But I knew something was wrong. The grandmother I remembered would never have agreed to some of the financial decisions that were apparently being made on her behalf. She was too savvy, too protective of her independence. When I tried to bring up my concerns with Grandma Rose directly, she seemed confused and would often change the subject or forget what we had been discussing. The situation reached a breaking point during my last visit home 6 months before Grandma Rose passed away. I arrived to find that my mother had been given power of attorney over all of Grandma's financial affairs. When I asked to see the documentation, I was told it was none of my business and that I should be grateful that someone responsible was handling things. Grateful for what? I asked, genuinely confused by the hostility I was encountering. Grateful that we're not asking you to contribute to Grandma's care, Marcus said, his voice cold and condescending. Grateful that we're handling all the difficult decisions so you can continue living your little social worker life without any real responsibility. The conversation devolved from there, with accusations flying about my lack of involvement, my selfishness, and my inability to understand the sacrifices the local family members were making. I left that visit feeling more alienated from my family than ever before, but also more convinced that something deeply wrong was happening. I tried reaching out to Grandma Rose's longtime lawyer, Mr. Harrison, but was told that the family had switched to a new attorney and that he was no longer involved in her affairs. When I asked my mother about this change, she said it was for convenience and that the new lawyer was a friend of Marcus's who could handle everything more efficiently. Every instinct I had was screaming that my family was taking advantage of Grandma Rose's declining mental state, but I felt powerless to do anything about it from across the country. When I suggested flying back to spend more time with her, I was told that too many visitors would be overwhelming and confusing for her. The last time I spoke to Grandma Rose, just 2 weeks before she passed away, she seemed more lucid than she had been in months. She told me she loved me and that she was proud of the work I was doing helping people. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. Maya, I hope you know that I never forgot about you, no matter what anyone might try to tell you later. When I asked her what she meant, she just patted my hand and said, "You were always my favorite, sweetheart. Don't let them convince you otherwise." 2 weeks later, Grandma Rose died peacefully in her sleep. I flew back immediately for the funeral, where I was treated like a distant relative rather than a granddaughter. The service was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that even in death, Grandma Rose was being controlled by people who hadn't truly understood or appreciated her in life. The funeral reception was held at Marcus's house, and I felt like a stranger in my own family. Relatives I hadn't seen in years offered polite condolences, but seemed to keep their distance, as if I had somehow become persona non grata. My cousins, who I had grown up with, were friendly enough, but seemed uncomfortable whenever I tried to engage in deeper conversations about Grandma Rose or her final years. The most telling moment came when I overheard my Aunt Helen talking to another relative about how difficult Maya has become and how Rose always worried that Maya would cause problems for the family. This was completely contrary to every interaction I had ever had with my grandmother, who had always been nothing but supportive and loving toward me. I confronted my mother about the things I was hearing, and she just sighed heavily, as if I was proving some point she had already made to others. Maya, I know you loved Grandma, but you have to understand that your relationship with her was different in her final years. The dementia changed things. She sometimes said things that weren't quite accurate or fair to the rest of us who were actually here taking care of her. This explanation felt like gaslighting on a massive scale. My grandmother might have had memory issues, but her core personality and values had remained consistent throughout her illness. The woman who had raised 3 children while building a business empire wasn't suddenly going to become confused about which grandchild had always been there for her emotionally. The real shock came 3 days after the funeral when Marcus called to inform me that the will reading would be held the following week. When I asked for the details so I could arrange to attend, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Actually, Maya, we've decided it would be better if you didn't attend the will reading. I thought I had misheard him. What do you mean? Look, we know this is going to be difficult, and honestly, given your attitude over the past few years and some of the things you said during Grandma's final months, we think it would be better for everyone if you weren't there. The lawyer can send you any relevant information afterward. I was speechless. In what world does a grandchild get excluded from their grandmother's while reading? I asked exactly that question, and Marcus's response revealed just how much resentment had been building in my family. Maya, you haven't been part of this family in any meaningful way for years. You moved across the country, you barely visit, you questioned every decision we made about Grandma's care, and you made her final months more stressful with your constant interference. Some of us think you've been ungrateful for everything this family has given you, and frankly, your presence at the will reading would just create unnecessary drama. The word ungrateful hit me like a physical blow. Ungrateful for what? For being made to feel like an outsider at every family gathering? For having my career choices constantly criticized? For being excluded from major family decisions and then blamed for not being involved enough? I tried calling Lily, hoping she might be more reasonable, but she just parroted Marcus's talking points about family harmony and how my negative energy had been affecting everyone. When I pointed out that excluding me from the will reading was probably illegal, she got defensive. No one's trying to cheat you out of anything, Maya. If Grandma left you something, you'll get it. We just think the actual reading should be for people who were actually present in her life during her final years. My mother was even more blunt when I called her. Maya, you made your choices. You chose your career over family. You chose to live on the other side of the country instead of being here when we needed you. You chose to question and criticize everything we did for Grandma instead of being supportive. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences mean you don't get to be included in everything just because you share DNA with us. I spent hours on the phone with family members, trying to find someone who would support my right to be present at my own grandmother's will reading, but the message was consistent. I had been deemed unworthy of inclusion, and the family had closed ranks against me. The exclusion felt like more than just missing a legal proceeding. It felt like the final severing of my connection to the family I had been born into. I had always known I was different from them, had always felt like I didn't quite fit their mold of what a Chin family member should be, but I never imagined they would literally remove me from family business. I considered hiring a lawyer to force my inclusion, but what was the point? Even if I legally had the right to be there, the emotional damage was already done. My family had made it clear that they didn't consider me a real member anymore, and showing up to force my way into their inner circle would only reinforce their narrative about my being difficult and ungrateful. Instead, I decided to wait and see what information would be sent to me afterward. If Grandma Rose had left me something, I would receive it eventually. If she hadn't, then at least I would know where I stood and could finally move on from the family that had never really accepted me anyway. But something deep in my gut told me this story wasn't over. Grandma Rose had been too sharp, too aware of family dynamics, and too protective of fairness to simply forget about the granddaughter who had always been there for her emotionally. Her final words to me about not letting them convince me she had forgotten about me kept echoing in my mind. The will reading was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. I would be at my office in San Francisco, 3,000 miles away, trying to focus on helping my clients while my family discovered what my grandmother had really thought about all of us. Part of me wondered if being excluded might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. I had no idea how right I was or how wrong my family's calculations had been. The morning of the will reading, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the coffee I hadn't had yet. Despite everything my family had put me through, despite their clear message that I wasn't welcome or wanted, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma Rose and what she might have included in her final wishes. I threw myself into work, scheduling back-to-back client meetings to keep my mind occupied. I was in the middle of a session with a teenager who was struggling with family abandonment issues when the irony of my own situation hit me like a freight train. Here I was, helping someone else process their family trauma while completely avoiding my own. By noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. back home, I figured the will reading was probably over. I kept checking my phone, expecting maybe a text from Lily or a brief email from Marcus with some basic information about whatever small token Grandma might have left me. Maybe a piece of jewelry or one of her books. Something sentimental, but not significant enough to matter to the real family members who had earned their places at the table. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from back home. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was some kind of spam call, but something made me pick up. "Is this Maya Chin?" The voice was professional, older, with a slight southern accent that didn't sound familiar. "Yes, this is Maya. Miss Chin, my name is Robert Harrison. I was your grandmother's attorney for over 30 years before your family switched to new representation last year. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I felt it was important to speak with you directly." My heart started racing. This was the lawyer my family had supposedly stopped using for convenience. Why was he calling me? "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, but I'm not sure why you're calling. My family told me they had switched lawyers, and I wasn't included in the will reading today, so I'm not sure what." "Miss Chin, that's exactly why I'm calling. I attended your grandmother's will reading today as an observer, and there are some things you need to know about what actually happened." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What do you mean you attended as an observer?" "Your grandmother came to see me about 2 months before she passed away. She was having what we call a lucid period. Her mind was completely clear, and she was very concerned about some changes that had been made to her estate planning without her full understanding. She asked me to prepare some additional documentation and to ensure that certain information would reach you regardless of what your family might try to do." I sat down heavily in my desk chair, my hands starting to shake. "Mr. Harrison, I think you need to explain what's going on, because my family has told me that I was excluded from the will reading because I've been ungrateful and difficult, and that. MS. Chin, your grandmother asked me specifically to tell you that story was complete fabrication. She was very clear about her feelings regarding each of her grandchildren and very specific about her concerns regarding how your family had been handling her affairs." The knot in my stomach was turning into full-blown nausea. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that would be better discussed in person, if you're able to fly back here. What I can tell you over the phone is that the will reading your family held today was not for your grandmother's actual final will and testament." I literally dropped the phone. When I picked it back up, Mr. Harrison was still there, patiently waiting for me to process what he had just told me. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Did you just say that wasn't her real will?" "That's correct. The document that was read today was based on changes made to your grandmother's estate plan during a period when her mental capacity was questionable, and when she was under what I believe constituted undue influence from family members. Your grandmother's actual final will, which she executed during a lucid period and with proper legal safeguards, tells a very different story about her intentions." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. "Mr. Harrison, are you telling me that my family committed some kind of fraud?" "I'm telling you that your grandmother was very specific about wanting you to know the truth about her final wishes, and that she took steps to ensure that truth would come to light regardless of what anyone else might try to do. She also left you a letter that explains her concerns about your family's behavior during her final years." My mind was racing with implications I couldn't fully process. What happens now? Do I need to hire a lawyer? Should I be calling the police? I don't even understand what this means. What this means, Miss Chin, is that your grandmother's actual will needs to be probated, and the estate needs to be distributed according to her real final wishes rather than the document your family used today. It also means that some very uncomfortable questions are going to need to be asked about how your family obtained power of attorney and made changes to her estate planning. I was quiet for a long moment, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I was being told. My family hadn't just excluded me from a will reading, they had excluded me from a fake will reading based on documents that apparently weren't even legitimate. "Mr. Harrison, when you say her actual final will tells a different story, what exactly do you mean?" There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling on the other end of the line. "Miss Chin, I think it would be better if you heard this information in person, along with your grandmother's letter. But what I can tell you is that she was very clear about recognizing the grandchild who had always shown her genuine love and respect, versus those who had suddenly become interested in her welfare only when she became vulnerable. The implication hit me like lightning. Are you saying she left me something significant? I'm saying she left you everything, Miss Chen. The house, the investment properties, the business assets, her personal effects, everything except for small sentimental gifts to your brother and sister. And she left very clear instructions about why she made these decisions. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and I felt like I might pass out. My grandmother, the woman my family had convinced me barely remembered me in her final years, had left me her entire estate? Mr. Harrison, I think I need to fly back there immediately. I think that would be wise, Miss Chen. There are some legal procedures we'll need to begin, and frankly, I suspect your family is going to have some very strong reactions when they learn what actually happened today. Your grandmother specifically requested that I wait 24 hours after their will reading before contacting you, but after that point, the truth was going to come out whether they liked it or not. What should I do about my family? Should I call them and tell them what you've told me? I would strongly advise waiting until you've read your grandmother's letter and we've had a chance to discuss the full situation in person. This is going to be complicated, both legally and emotionally, and you'll want to understand all the facts before you have those conversations. After we hung up, I sat in my office for over an hour, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a 30-minute phone call, everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandmother, and my place in both had been completely turned upside down. I caught the red-eye flight that night and landed back home with my head spinning and my heart pounding. The entire 6-hour flight had been spent oscillating between disbelief, anger, and a strange kind of vindication that I didn't quite know how to process. Mr. Harrison had offered to meet me at his office first thing in the morning, and I had taken him up on it without even thinking about where I would stay or how I would handle seeing my family. His office was in the same building where my grandmother had conducted business for decades, a stately brick structure downtown that felt like stepping back in time. Mr. Harrison was exactly what I had pictured from his voice, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of steady demeanor that probably came from handling family crises for 40 years. Miss Chin, thank you for coming so quickly. I know this situation is overwhelming, but I want you to know that your grandmother was very thoughtful about how she wanted this information to reach you. He led me to a conference room where a thick folder sat on the polished wooden table, along with a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Rose's careful handwriting. I think you should read her letter first. It will help explain the legal documents we'll be reviewing afterward. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded 3 pages of my grandmother's distinctive script. Even seeing her handwriting again made me emotional, but what I read left me completely shaken. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this letter, it means that my concerns about your family were unfortunately justified, and that they have tried to exclude you from my final wishes just as they excluded you from my final years. I want you to know that their behavior toward you during my illness was one of the most heartbreaking things I experienced, and it clarified for me exactly who in our family truly understood what love and loyalty mean. You were the only grandchild who visited me because you wanted to spend time with me, not because you wanted something from me. You were the only one who listened to my stories, who cared about my thoughts and feelings, and who treated me like a person rather than just an elderly woman whose mind was failing. When you questioned the financial decisions being made on my behalf, you were protecting me, even though it cost you your family's acceptance. Marcus and Lily, with your mother's encouragement, began treating me like an ATM the moment they thought I was too confused to notice. They had me sign papers I didn't understand. They made financial decisions that benefited them rather than preserving my legacy, and they used my confusion to manipulate me into agreeing to things I would never have approved in my right mind. But I wasn't as confused as they thought I was, Maya. I had good days and bad days, but on my good days, I saw exactly what was happening. I saw how they pushed you away when you tried to protect me. I saw how they convinced other family members that you were being difficult when you were actually being the only honest person in the room. I saw how they tried to rewrite the story of our relationship to justify excluding you from family decisions. I have left you everything, sweetheart, because you are the only one who loved me without wanting anything in return. The house, the properties, the business investments, it's all yours now. Marcus and Lily will receive small personal items that belong to their grandfather because I believe in family connections, but they will not benefit financially from their manipulation and betrayal. I know this will cause a tremendous amount of conflict, and I'm sorry to leave you with that burden. But I also know that you are strong enough to handle whatever comes next, and that you will use this inheritance to help people and make the world better, just like you've always done. Please don't let them convince you that you don't deserve this, or that you somehow manipulated me. The only manipulation in our family came from people who thought they could take advantage of an old woman's vulnerability. You protected me when no one else would, and now I'm protecting you the only way I still can. Mr. Harrison will explain all the legal details, but I want you to know that every decision I made was deliberate, carefully considered, and based on years of watching how each member of our family treated others when they thought no one was paying attention. I love you, Maya. I'm proud of you. And I hope this inheritance will give you the freedom to continue being the amazing person you've always been. Love always. Grandma Rose. I was sobbing by the time I finished reading. Mr. Harrison quietly handed me a box of tissues and waited for me to compose myself before speaking. Your grandmother came to me during one of her most lucid periods, about 6 weeks before she passed away. She was very clear about what she had observed regarding your family's behavior, and very specific about wanting to ensure that her actual wishes were carried out rather than the version your family had manipulated her into signing earlier. He opened the folder and began explaining the legal documents. The estate was worth significantly more than I had realized, nearly $3.2 million in total assets, including the family home, for rental properties, and a substantial investment portfolio that Grandma Rose had been building for decades. The will your family had read yesterday, Mr. Harrison explained, was based on documents signed during a period when your grandmother's mental capacity was questionable, and when she was being pressured to make decisions that primarily benefited your mother, brother, and sister. That will left you a token $10,000 and some personal items, while dividing the bulk of the estate among the other family members. The contrast was staggering. My family had gathered yesterday expecting to divide a multi-million-dollar estate among themselves, leaving me with basically nothing, while the real will left me nearly everything. What happens now? I asked, still trying to process the magnitude of the situation. Now we file the actual will with the probate court, and we begin the process of challenging the legitimacy of the previous will. Your family will be notified that their will reading was based on invalid documents, and they'll have the opportunity to contest your grandmother's actual final wishes if they choose to do so. Are they going to be in legal trouble for what they did? Mr. Harrison considered this carefully. That will depend on what our investigation reveals about how they obtained power of attorney and influenced your grandmother's decision-making. At minimum, they're going to have to explain some very questionable financial transactions and document signings. At worst, there could be charges related to elder abuse and estate fraud. The enormity of what was about to happen to my family was overwhelming. In less than 24 hours, they were going to learn that their carefully orchestrated plan to exclude me and divide Grandma's assets among themselves had backfired spectacularly. They were about to discover that the grandmother they had manipulated and controlled had been far more aware of their behavior than they realized. I thought about Marcus, who had been so condescending about my little social worker life and my lack of real responsibility. I thought about my mother, who had accused me of being ungrateful for everything the family had given me. I thought about Lily, who had gone along with excluding me to maintain family harmony. But you know what? Right now, as I sit here processing this incredible turn of events, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you who've been following this story. If you're watching from somewhere that family drama hits close to home, I see you. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, I feel you. Before we get to what happened when my family found out the truth, and trust me, you are not ready for their reactions, hit that like button if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. And definitely subscribe because the revenge satisfaction that's coming in the next part is absolutely incredible. Mr. Harrison, I said finally, when do we tell them? I'll be calling your brother first thing Monday morning to inform him that we'll be filing the actual will with the probate court and that the estate distribution they discussed yesterday will not be moving forward as planned. And then, Miss Chin, your family is going to learn that actions have consequences and that the granddaughter they dismissed as ungrateful just inherited everything they thought was rightfully theirs. For the first time in years, I felt like Grandma Rose was still protecting me, still standing up for what was right, even from beyond the grave. The golden child and the perfect daughter were about to discover that their manipulation and greed had cost them everything, while the family disappointment had just inherited a fortune. The karma was going to be absolutely beautiful. Monday morning came faster than I expected, and I spent the weekend in a hotel room, trying to prepare myself for what was about to unfold. Mr. Harrison had advised me to stay out of contact with my family until after he delivered the news, but the waiting was excruciating. I kept checking my phone, expecting angry calls or texts that never came because my family still had no idea what was coming for them. At 9:30 a.m., my phone finally rang. It was Marcus, and even before I answered, I could tell from the caller ID display showing up 4 times in quick succession that something had definitely happened. Maya, what the hell is going on? His voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. Some lawyer just called me talking about Grandma's actual will and saying that Friday's reading was invalid. What kind of game are you playing? I took a deep breath, channeling the composure that years of social work had taught me when dealing with hostile clients. I'm not playing any games, Marcus. Mr. Harrison contacted me because Grandma Rose asked him to make sure I knew about her real final wishes. Her real final wishes? Maya, what are you talking about? We had the will reading. The lawyer read us her will. You weren't there because you've been nothing but difficult and ungrateful, and apparently, Grandma agreed since she only left you $10,000. Marcus, that wasn't her real will. There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying that the will you heard on Friday was based on documents that Grandma signed when she wasn't mentally capable of making those decisions, and when she was being manipulated by family members who took advantage of her vulnerability. You're accusing us of manipulating Grandma? Maya, you've got to be kidding me. You barely visited her. You lived across the country. We were the ones taking care of her every single day. Taking care of her or taking care of her money. The explosion that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard from my normally controlled brother. He screamed at me for 20 minutes straight, accusing me of manipulating an elderly woman's lawyer, of trying to steal money that didn't belong to me, of being a selfish, ungrateful bitch who couldn't accept that Grandma had finally seen me for what I really was. When he finally ran out of steam, I said quietly, Marcus, I have a letter from Grandma explaining exactly why she made the decision she did, and it tells a very different story about who was manipulative and ungrateful. You're lying. I'm not lying. And you're going to find out soon enough when Mr. Harrison files the actual will with the probate court. The call ended with Marcus screaming that he was going to fight this, that he was going to prove I had somehow coerced Grandma Rose, and that I would never see a penny of money that rightfully belonged to the family members who had actually cared for her. Lily called an hour later, crying hysterically and begging me to explain what was happening. Her approach was different from Marcus's. Instead of anger, she went straight to emotional manipulation. Maya, please tell me this is all some kind of mistake. Please tell me you're not really trying to take everything away from the family. We were counting on that inheritance. David and I were going to use our portion to buy a house and start a family. You know we've been struggling financially. How can you do this to us? Lily, I didn't do anything to you. Grandma Rose made her own decisions about her estate based on how she felt each of us had treated her. But you were her favorite. You were always her favorite, and she was confused at the end. It's not fair that she would punish the rest of us just because she had some kind of delusion about who cared about her more. This was fascinating to me. When my family wanted to exclude me, they insisted that Grandma Rose was mentally clear and had rightfully determined that I was ungrateful and difficult. But now that her actual wishes benefited me, suddenly she was confused and delusional. Lily, if you think she was confused, then maybe you should be asking yourself why you were comfortable with her making major financial decisions during that period when it benefited you. My sister's tears turned to anger quickly. Maya, you know what you're doing. You know this is going to destroy our family. Is your revenge really worth tearing apart everything we've built together? What exactly have we built together, Lily? A family dynamic where I'm excluded from major decisions and then blamed for not being involved enough? Where my career is constantly criticized and my choices are dismissed? Where I can be literally banned from my own grandmother's will reading because you've decided I don't deserve to be there? We were trying to protect everyone from unnecessary drama. You were trying to protect yourselves from having a witness to whatever you had convinced Grandma to sign. My mother called that afternoon, and her conversation was the most revealing of all. Unlike Marcus's rage or Lily's tears, my mother was coldly furious in a way that felt dangerous. Maya, I don't know what kind of lies you've told this lawyer, but I want you to know that your behavior is going to have consequences beyond just money. You're destroying this family, and when this is all over, you're going to find yourself completely alone. Mom, I haven't told the lawyer anything. Grandma Rose told him everything herself in her own words, while she was mentally competent to do so. Your grandmother was not mentally competent during her final months. She was confused, paranoid, and saying things that made no sense. The idea that she would leave everything to you when you barely participated in her care is proof that she wasn't thinking clearly. But she was thinking clearly enough for you to have her sign over power of attorney and make changes to her estate planning. My mother's pause told me everything I needed to know. Those decisions were made in her best interests, with proper legal guidance, to ensure that her care could be managed efficiently. Efficiently for who, Mom? Maya, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. You're not just taking money away from your family, you're destroying relationships that can never be repaired. Is that really what you want? What I wanted was to be treated like a member of the family instead of like an inconvenient outsider. What I wanted was for my grandmother's final years to be about her comfort and happiness, not about positioning yourselves for financial benefit. You're being selfish and vindictive. Mom, I'm being exactly what Grandma Rose taught me to be, honest about what's right and wrong, even when it's uncomfortable for everyone involved. The conversation ended with my mother threatening to contest the will and promising that I would regret tearing the family apart over money. But what she didn't understand was that the family had been torn apart long before Grandma Rose died. The inheritance was just finally making visible the cracks that had always existed beneath the surface. Over the next few days, I received increasingly desperate and angry calls from various family members who had heard about the situation. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to understand my side of the story. Aunts and uncles who had been politely distant at the funeral were now calling to express their disappointment in my selfish behavior. The family narrative was crystallizing quickly. I was a vindictive granddaughter who had manipulated a confused elderly woman into leaving me an inheritance I didn't deserve, thereby destroying a loving family's financial security. According to this version of events, I had somehow traveled back in time to convince Grandma Rose to write a completely different will while she was mentally competent, all as part of an elaborate revenge scheme against the family members who had lovingly cared for her. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, but it was also revealing. My family could not accept that their own behavior had consequences, so they had to create a story in which I was the villain who had destroyed their carefully laid plans through manipulation and lies. But Mr. Harrison had more revelations that were about to make their narrative even harder to maintain. During our meetings that week, he showed me bank records that revealed the true extent of my family's financial manipulation during Grandma Rose's final year. Marcus had convinced Grandma to loan him $150,000 for what he claimed was a temporary business investment. Lily had received $75,000 for what was supposedly an emergency medical expense that her insurance didn't cover. My mother had been receiving a monthly caregiver fee of $3,000 for managing Grandma's affairs, despite the fact that Grandma was still living independently and had a housekeeper. Most damaging of all, they had convinced Grandma to transfer ownership of one of her rental properties to Marcus for tax purposes, with the understanding that he would transfer it back after some unspecified financial restructuring. The property was now worth nearly $400,000, and there was no documentation of any plan to return it to Grandma's estate. "Miss Chin," Mr. Harrison said gravely, "what your family did constitutes a textbook case of financial elder abuse. They used your grandmother's trust and her periods of confusion to systematically transfer assets from her estate to themselves, while simultaneously excluding the one family member who might have questioned these transactions." The picture that emerged was of a coordinated effort to extract as much money as possible from Grandma Rose while she was vulnerable, followed by an attempt to legitimize these transfers through a manipulated will that would give them official ownership of everything they had already taken. My exclusion from the family during Grandma's final months wasn't just about their discomfort with my questions, it was about preventing me from discovering the extent of their financial exploitation. "What happens next?" I asked. "Next, we file a formal complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services Division, and we begin the process of recovering the assets that were transferred improperly. Your family is going to face some very serious legal scrutiny regarding their handling of your grandmother's finances." As I left Mr. Harrison's office that day, I felt a complex mix of vindication, sadness, and anticipation. My family had spent years making me feel like I was the problem, like my concerns about their behavior were evidence of my own dysfunction and ingratitude. Now the truth was coming out, and it was more damaging to them than I had ever imagined. But I also felt sadness for what we had lost as a family. There had been real love and connection once, before greed and manipulation poisoned everything. My grandmother had been the heart of our family for so long, and losing her had revealed just how little genuine affection was left among the people she had loved most. The legal battle was just beginning, but the moral victory was already complete. My family had gambled that they could manipulate and exclude me without consequences, and they had lost everything they had been so desperate to protect. The news of the contested will spread through our extended family and community like wildfire. Within a week, I was getting calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know the real story about what was happening with the Chin family inheritance dispute. The reactions fell into predictable patterns. Older family members, particularly those who had known Grandma Rose for decades, were not surprised by her actual final wishes. Several of my aunts and uncles privately admitted that they had been uncomfortable with how Marcus, Lily, and my mother had suddenly become so involved in Grandma's affairs during her final year. "Your grandmother was always sharp," my Uncle James told me during a phone call. "Even when she started having memory problems, she was still very aware of people's motivations." I wondered why she would suddenly start making financial decisions that seemed so out of character for her. My cousin Sarah, who lived in another state and hadn't been involved in the day-to-day family dynamics, was even more direct. "Maya, I have to tell you, the whole family was talking about how weird Marcus and Lily were being at the funeral. They kept making comments about Grandma's generosity and how grateful everyone should be for their sacrifices in taking care of her. It felt like they were already counting money that wasn't theirs yet. But the younger generation, particularly Marcus and Lily's friends and spouses, had bought completely into the narrative that I was a vindictive gold digger who had somehow manipulated a confused elderly woman. The Facebook posts and indirect social media comments were brutal, painting me as a selfish outsider who had destroyed a loving family for money. My brother-in-law David, Lily's husband, was particularly vocal about his outrage. He posted a long Facebook rant about how some people will do anything for money, including taking advantage of vulnerable elderly relatives and destroying family relationships. He didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Marcus's wife Jennifer was more subtle but equally vicious, posting inspirational quotes about family loyalty and how true character is revealed when money is involved. She also made several posts about the importance of caring for elderly parents and grandparents, with strong implications about who in our family had actually done the caring. The social media campaign against me was coordinated and relentless, but it had an unintended consequence. It made my family look desperate and petty to anyone who was paying attention. If they were really confident in the legitimacy of their claims, why did they need to mount a public relations offensive against me? More importantly, their public statements started creating legal problems for them. David's Facebook rant included specific claims about how much money they had spent caring for Grandma Rose, numbers that didn't match the financial records Mr. Harrison had uncovered. Jennifer's posts about family caregiving created a timeline that contradicted the medical records showing Grandma Rose had been living independently with minimal assistance until very close to her death. The turning point came when Marcus made the mistake of giving an interview to a local newspaper reporter who had picked up on the story as a human interest piece about family inheritance disputes. He presented himself as the devoted grandson who had sacrificed his own financial security to care for his beloved grandmother, only to be cheated out of his inheritance by a manipulative sister who had swooped in at the last minute. My sister hadn't visited my grandmother more than 3 times in the past 2 years, Marcus told the reporter. But somehow she convinced Grandma to change her will and leave her everything. It's heartbreaking to see how elderly people can be taken advantage of by family members who pretend to care about them. The problem with Marcus's interview was that Mr. Harrison had been documenting everything, including phone records that showed I had been calling Grandma Rose regularly, visitor logs from her building that contradicted Marcus's claims about my visits, and medical records that proved Grandma had been mentally competent when she executed her real will. When the newspaper followed up on Marcus's claims and spoke with Mr. Harrison, the story took a very different turn. The headline changed from "Family Inheritance, Dispute Divides Siblings" to "Attorney Questions Family's Claims in Elder Abuse Investigation." Mr. Harrison was quoted extensively in the follow-up article, explaining that his investigation had revealed concerning patterns of financial manipulation and that the family members claiming to have been devoted caregivers had actually been systematically extracting money from their elderly relatives' estate. The article also included a statement from Adult Protective Services confirming that they were investigating allegations of financial elder abuse related to the case, and that several family members were being asked to provide documentation for large financial transfers that had occurred during the elderly victim's final year. Reading that article was surreal. Seeing my family's behavior described in clinical terms by professionals who dealt with elder abuse cases made me realize just how textbook their manipulation had been. They had followed a predictable pattern: isolate the victim from protective family members, gain financial control through power of attorney, make incremental transfers of assets while the victim was vulnerable, and then attempt to legitimize everything through a manipulated will. The public exposure was devastating for Marcus professionally. His investment firm began asking uncomfortable questions about his judgment and ethics, particularly given that he had been publicly accused of financially exploiting an elderly family member. Several of his clients started moving their accounts to other advisors, concerned about being associated with someone involved in an elder abuse investigation. Lily's husband David faced consequences at his job as well. He worked for a nonprofit organization focused on senior services, and his employer was understandably concerned about having an employee whose family was under investigation for elder abuse. While he wasn't fired, he was quietly moved to a different department and told that his advancement opportunities might be limited until the legal situation was resolved. My mother faced the most serious professional consequences. She worked as a part-time bookkeeper for several small businesses, and her clients began questioning whether someone who was under investigation for financial manipulation could be trusted with their company finances. She lost 3 major accounts within a month of the newspaper article being published. But the real shock came when Mr. Harrison called to tell me about a conversation he'd had with the lawyer who had supposedly prepared the fake will that was read at my family's will reading. Miss Chin, this is where the story gets very interesting. I spoke with attorney Michael Ross, the lawyer your family claimed had prepared your grandmother's will. He confirmed that he did prepare a will for your grandmother about 8 months before she died, but he says the document that was read at your family's will reading was not the document he prepared. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? I mean that someone altered the will after he prepared it, or created an entirely different document and claimed it was the will he had prepared. Attorney Ross is very concerned about potential ethics violations and fraud, and he's cooperating fully with our investigation. So my family didn't just take advantage of Grandma when she was confused, they actually forged legal documents? That's what the evidence is suggesting. And if that's the case, we're not just looking at elder abuse charges anymore. We're potentially looking at fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges that could result in serious criminal penalties. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. My family's scheme wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially criminal in ways that could send them to prison. I thought about Marcus, who had been so condescending about my little social worker life and my lack of real responsibility. I thought about my mother, who had accused me of being ungrateful for everything the family had given me. I thought about Lily, who had cried about how unfair it was that Grandma Rose would punish the family members who had cared for her. They had all been so convinced that they were entitled to Grandma's money, so sure that their manipulation and exclusion of me would go undetected, so confident that they could rewrite the story of our family to justify their greed. Now they were facing the possibility of criminal charges, public humiliation, professional destruction, and the loss of everything they had been so desperate to steal. The karma was more complete than I could have ever imagined. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same house where I spent countless afternoons listening to Grandma Rose's stories, but everything has changed in ways I could never have anticipated. The legal proceedings moved faster than anyone expected, primarily because my family's crimes were so thoroughly documented and their attempts to cover them up were so clumsy that prosecutors described it as one of the most clear-cut elder abuse cases they had ever handled. Marcus was the first to crack under the pressure. When faced with potential federal fraud charges and the loss of his securities license, he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the full scope of their scheme, including details that even Mr. Harrison hadn't uncovered. The plan had been in motion for over a year before Grandma Rose died. My family had been monitoring her mental state, waiting for periods when she was confused or exhausted to present her with financial documents they claimed were routine paperwork. They had convinced her to sign over power of attorney by telling her it was temporary and would make it easier for them to help with her day-to-day finances. Once they had legal control, they began systematically transferring assets to themselves through loans and gifts that Grandma Rose didn't fully understand she was authorizing. When she started asking questions about her finances during lucid periods, they told her she was confused and that everything had been explained to her previously. The most damning evidence came from recordings that Marcus had made during some of their conversations with Grandma Rose, recordings he had intended to use as evidence that she was mentally incompetent if anyone questioned their authority. Instead, the recordings proved that Grandma had been asking legitimate questions about her finances and that my family had been deliberately misleading her about what she was signing. Marcus received 3 years in prison for financial elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. His investment firm fired him, his wife filed for divorce, and he lost his house when the legal fees and restitution payments overwhelmed his finances. Lily received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation in exchange for her cooperation, but the consequences to her personal life were devastating. Her husband David left her, taking their young daughter with him and filing for full custody based on her criminal conviction. She lost her job and had to move back in with my mother, who was dealing with her own legal problems. My mother received 2 years in prison and was ordered to pay substantial restitution to the estate. At 68 years old, she became a convicted felon who lost her home, her reputation, and her relationship with most of her extended family and friends. But the most satisfying consequence wasn't legal, it was social. The family members and friends who had initially supported my family's narrative about my being a vindictive gold digger gradually learned the truth about what had really happened. One by one, they reached out to me with apologies and expressions of support. My cousin Sarah was one of the first to call after Marcus's confession became public. "Maya, I owe you a huge apology. I believed their version of the story because I couldn't imagine family members doing something so calculated and cruel to their own grandmother. I'm ashamed that I didn't see what was really happening." The social media posts that had initially attacked me were quietly deleted, replaced by posts expressing shock and disappointment about the family tragedy that had unfolded. Jennifer, Marcus's soon-to-be ex-wife, even posted a public apology acknowledging that she had been wrong about the situation and praising me for having the courage to expose the truth. But the most meaningful vindication came from family members who shared their own memories of my relationship with Grandma Rose. My Uncle James wrote a beautiful Facebook post about how I had been the grandchild who truly understood Grandma's values and spirit, and how she had often mentioned how proud she was of my work helping others. "Rose always said that Maya was the one who got it," he wrote. "She understood that success wasn't about money or status, it was about treating people with kindness and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Rose would be proud to know that her legacy is in the hands of someone who shares her values. As for the inheritance itself, I've tried to use it in ways that would honor Grandma Rose's memory and values. I've kept the family home, but I've turned it into a transitional housing facility for young adults aging out of the foster care system, combining my professional expertise with Grandma's resources to help people who need a stable foundation to build their lives on. The rental properties provide steady income that funds the program, and I've used part of the investment portfolio to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from immigrant families, just like Grandma Rose had been. I've also been able to expand my own career, leaving my job at the understaffed County Social Services Office to start my own nonprofit organization focused on elder advocacy and protection. Mr. Harrison has become one of my board members, and we've been able to help several other families navigate similar situations with potentially abusive relatives. The work feels like a continuation of what I was already doing, but with the resources to make a much bigger impact. I think Grandma Rose would appreciate the irony that my family's attempts to exclude me from her legacy ultimately enabled me to carry forward her values on a much larger scale. I still think about my family sometimes, though I haven't spoken to any of them since the trials ended. I wonder if they've learned anything from what happened, or if they still see themselves as victims of my vindictiveness rather than perpetrators of their own downfall. Marcus will be released from prison in 2 years, and I genuinely hope he uses that time to reflect on how his greed and entitlement led him to betray the grandmother who had always loved him. Lily is slowly rebuilding her life, working at a retail job and living with our mother, but she's lost custody of her daughter and may never fully recover from the consequences of her choices. My mother writes me letters sometimes, which I don't read but also don't throw away. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what she has to say, but right now the wounds are still too fresh and the betrayal too complete. The strangest part of this whole experience is how it's changed my understanding of family and loyalty. I grew up believing that blood relationships created unbreakable bonds, and that family members should support each other no matter what. What I learned is that real family isn't about DNA. It's about people who truly see you, value you, and stand by you when things get difficult. Grandma Rose was family in the truest sense, even when her own children and other grandchildren failed her. The clients I work with now, the young people living in the transitional housing program, the board members of my nonprofit, These people have become more like family to me than the relatives who shared my last name, but not my values. I think about Grandma Rose every day, especially when I'm making decisions about how to use the resources she left me. I can almost hear her voice encouraging me to keep fighting for people who need an advocate, to keep standing up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable, and to never let anyone convince me that kindness is weakness or that asking hard questions makes me difficult. The house still smells faintly like her perfume sometimes, and I like to think she's still here in some way, watching over the work we're doing and smiling about how her final act of love and protection continues to create positive change in the world. Before I wrap up this incredible journey, I have to ask you something that's been on my mind throughout this whole experience. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted completely were not who you thought they were? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all process the complicated emotions that come with family betrayal and unexpected justice. If this story resonated with you, or if you believe in the power of standing up for vulnerable people even when it costs you everything, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear about karma coming full circle. Subscribe to my channel because I'll be sharing more stories about the work we're doing at the nonprofit and how we're helping other families navigate similar situations. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for listening to a story that was painful to live through, but ultimately taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting someone's truth, even when everyone else wants to bury it. Here's to families that are chosen rather than assigned, to grandmothers who see through deception, and to the beautiful karma that ensures justice always finds its way home, even when it takes a little longer than we'd like. Remember, real family stands by you when you're protecting what's right, not when you're participating in what's wrong. Grandma Rose taught me that lesson, and I'll carry it forward for the rest of my life.